Hello, okutyoboola eddembe ly'obuntu, okusumulugunya abantu, okuwamba abantu, okubasibira obwemage n'okubamaza ebbanga eddene mu makomera nga tebaweza, buli bw'enguzi n'ebintu ebirala bingi. Omukulu Kyagulanyi Ssentamu Robert Bobi Wine n'ekibiina kye ekya National Unity Platform gy'emiramwa egy'enkizo gye bayimiriddeko okulaba nga bagenda nga wazungu okwogerera gavumenti ya Museveni nti ebintu bigiremye, nti byekola si bye bisaanidde mu nsi nga bwe zirina okutambula, nti Uganda tewali demokrasiya era nti abazungu balina okukikomya obutaddamu kuwa Mwai Museveni buyambi kuba obuyambi obwo abukozesa bubi. Kati nno bwe kiri mu ggwanga lya America, abakugu abanene okuva mu kibiina kya National Unity Platform bamaze dda okutuukayo era ng'omulamwa gwe baliko okulaba nti balemesa Mwai Museveni okuddamu okuweebwa ensimbi kuba nti azikozesa bubi, era nga abakulu bano bakulembeddwamu Maama Zedriga Walu ali mu ggwanga lya America asisinkanye abazungu abakola ku nsonga ez'okuwola amawanga ga Africa n'amawanga gonna, era ng'ayogeramu nabo ku biki ebirina okukolebwa, ebikolobero biri mu Uganda, ebikolebwa ebikyamu n'ebibi byonna abyogerako, biki ebirina okugobererwa nga bawa abantu oba nga bawola amawanga ssente, nti naye ensimbi zawola Mwai Museveni azikozesezza bubi nnyo, azikozesezza mu bukyamu nga bannayuganda tebaziganyulwamu. Ebintu bingi ebiri mu pulogulaamu ya leero era ogenda kuwulira ekisaliddwawo olunaku olwaleero, naki ekirina okugobererwa abazungu bakyeruppe kye balina okukola ku lwa Uganda.
Was not allowed to travel freely up there except under escort of Museveni soldiers. Some journalists did sneak in, some journalists came from there, but their reports were censored or their offices were burned down if they were reported too much. And so many people were in the dark as to what was happening there until very recently, when more of these the stories have come to light. But a lot of what you saw in those videos was going on up there, only more so and only worse. The 70 soldiers were committing terrible atrocities, which sparked the rise of rebel groups like Joseph Kony's LRA, which in turn committed even worse, in some respects, atrocities against the people that Kony thought were supporting the government. And that war raged in the east and the north for 27 years without people really knowing what was going on. And during this time, I continued to work on public health projects in Uganda, and gradually this story kind of dawned on me. And at the same time, I came to recognize that our government was spending hundreds of millions, even up to $1 billion now, of dollars each year in the country, much of which goes to very good things, such as health projects and so on. But there was also a lot of money going to the World Bank, into the military, and so on, which would find its way into Museveni's coffers and support the kind of activities that you saw in this video. And it upset me terribly because by that time I become very attached to Uganda and many of its people. And so I have tried to write about it and talk about it as much as I can since then.
Hi, well, thanks very much for having me. I thought I would kind of start with 2 points. One, I was most recently in Uganda in June, and I actually met with Museveni. And it struck me how different the circumstances were from the circumstances of Bobby in the film. And I thought I would just sort of describe that, because in the film, Bobby's always surrounded, there's incredible enthusiasm, and there clearly is, enormous popular support for him. and for the cause that he represents, trying to have a free and democratic Uganda. And to see Museveni, first of all, I had to fly out to southwestern Uganda. He was staying at Janet's farm, so estate. And so it was kind of, it was quite remote. And he, was very isolated. The only other visitors, I was there with a group of my colleagues from Human Rights Watch. The only other visitors were, a group of his political supporters, maybe 20 of them, all dressed in yellow. And they, sat through what seemed to be an incredibly long and boring set of speeches and kind of Q&A. But, no excitement, no energy, no vibrancy, nothing like what you saw in the film. And, I was left with this impression of, this withering man who is, trying to hang on for life, but who is increasingly isolated. Indeed, even our meeting, when it finally took place, and I had to wait, 2 hours for this rally to finish off, or meeting. We were, it was COVID, and so we met outside. We had to be, even though we were wearing masks, even though we were outside, we had to be, like maybe from here to, 2/3 of the way back there. So we had it with microphones, Mr. President, can I get you to, and it was just, there was this sort of stiltedness to it, and out of touchiness that was very striking. He clearly still controls the security forces. He's able to, exact considerable violence. But this is not a man who is, generating excitement, or who, has the vibrancy about him to be a leader anymore. And so I left in an odd way encouraged. Here to, excuse me? Missed that, but all right. Anyway, that I was, in an odd way it was encouraging, because even though he tried to say the right thing, I was pushing him on, so why are you arresting journalists who are observing rallies? Do you want violence to happen at rallies? Are journalists a good check on the security forces? And he said, yes. This would save all the right things just to kind of get rid of me, but was not, the follow through was the issue. Or, on social media. I said, so why'd you shut down social media? Well, Facebook, they only closed my, my party's sites. I was saying, I don't think that's what happened. But I don't think he even uses social media, so he was just repeating what people had told him. But he was, again, he just seemed very out of touch. And so, despite it being a kind of depressing meeting, I left oddly encouraged that this may well be a moment for change. And when you contrast that with...
Wow.
Now, one other point I'd like to make is that, because Adam, you asked, how does this compare to the rest of the world? And I see Uganda going through a pattern that we are seeing elsewhere as well. We're seeing it in Russia, in Belarus, in Nicaragua. It used to be, even as recently as 2-3 years ago, that autocrats like Museveni would have what was called a managed election. And that is to say, there would be an election, but they would tilt the playing field enough. They would, suppress a few media outlets, handicap to some extent the political opposition, arrest a few people, just enough to make sure that the opposition didn't win. But then they'd have an election. And there wasn't necessarily massive fraud. They would count up the votes. They were pretty confident they would win. So it was just a matter of tilting the playing field enough to guarantee victory. It's clear that Museveni no longer trusts even a managed election. And in this, he really parallels people like Ortega in Nicaragua, or Lukashenko in Belarus, or even I think to some extent in Russia. And that is that they don't have confidence that they would even win on a tilted playing field. So instead what they're doing is they're creating zombie elections. So they shoot the other side's supporters. They lock up the candidate, or put the candidate under house arrest. They shut down political parties. They close social media. They impede journalists. They make it impossible to have any kind of genuine political competition. There's no debate. There's no opportunity to rally and to protest and to do things that are, what you do in a campaign. And so, what's left is this electoral charade. We know what the result is. They just, they can announce the result without having it. But they go through the charade. But the charade has zero legitimacy. With a managed election, they can still pretend, I had an election. I'm the elected president of Uganda. Museveni can't say that today. He won the zombie election that he set up, with the results preordained. And so that means he got no legitimacy from that charade. And that again, the crackdown, the heightened violence, the greater repression, these are all signs of weakness. These are a man who doesn't trust the people of Uganda, even under sort of tilted circumstances, to choose him. He's just going to force his way into his next term. And that is not a good long-term solution. That is not a route to legitimacy. That is a desperate clinging to power when everything else has failed. And so again, I see the silver lining in the adversity. I see that, Museveni has run out of tricks. He's still in power. He's still got the guns, but that is not a way to maintain power. Even dictators need, the acquiescence of their people. And Museveni has lost that. So I come out of this, this time of sadness, of despair. I come out of it still recognizing that these seem to be the end days of the Museveni dictatorship.
Yeah.
Another follow-up question. So Uganda is known as hosting one of the largest refugee populations in the world. And Museveni himself will often use this as leverage when his human rights record is brought up by other foreign leaders. And we've seen this with other, authoritarian leaders as well, Turkey and elsewhere, who use their humanitarian support for refugees, which the world community needs, as a shield for their own poor human rights record. What is the best way for world leaders and civil society more general to respond to this sort of dichotomy? Yes.
I can answer that quickly. Which it also partly answered the question you asked before about what makes Museveni different. What makes it a bit different is in part that he has meddled in neighboring countries in a way that few other leaders, except maybe Vladimir Putin, have. So his forces, well, along with Kagame, but he meddled in Rwanda to put Kagame there.
Yeah, exactly.
He meddled in southern Sudan to break that country.
Yes, yeah.
And then he meddled in Congo, and is currently continuing. We don't know what he's doing there at the moment, but for a while he was tearing that country to pieces too. He has, it's almost as though there's this idea of this sort of greater vision of trying to kind of control the entire region. And it's very, very scary. And most of the refugees inside Uganda actually come from those wars.
Yes.
So it is we call it the, it's as though the United Nations and the Western world have hired a goat to be the gardener, right? That's a Central European expression.
Exactly.
And to take care of these refugees who should be home where they belong and where they want to be, where we all like to be. So, meanwhile, ravaging too, which is creating more and more refugees, some of whom are here, all over the world. So that's what I would say.
I think I would like to agree and add. I come from West Nile, that is northern Uganda, which is really hosting quite many of the refugees. But there is also the corruption and clinging to power angle to the refugee situation as it is portrayed by Museveni. One, exonerating the numbers. He puts abnormal numbers because there is the office of the Prime Minister that manages these refugees, that manages the numbers, that manages the real refugees. There's a validation report that was done by FIDA Uganda, where many of the refugees in West Nile are actually not from South Sudan. They are actually not from DR Congo. But the population are used, a number of the people in the population, during the validation it was actually very embarrassing because many of the people could not speak the languages from South Sudan. So yes, it's about the money. It's about the money the world is giving, the Western world is giving to him in the name of refugees, when actually he is causing the refugee escalation from DR Congo, from South Sudan, from Rwanda, from Burundi, from Somalia, and then Skyping the numbers. It's about what Professor, you rightfully said, one of the methods of clinging to power, looking at making the West world, making the US look at him as this expert, as this very good boy who is keeping the refugees.
Jesus.
Yes. And I want to also agree with you that he has run out of options.
Yes.
He totally has. Because when I was abducted by men, military men, on a campaign trail, and imprisoned with men, yes, for 2 days, given a basin to answer to the call of nature, in the full eye of those 30+ men,
Jesus.
it was to dehumanize, to shut down. And I would like to congratulate the team that put these clips together. Bobi Wine awakens, because we were slumbering in our sleep. We were so scared. But now, lo and behold, to Museveni's nightmare, every Ugandan has now come out and resolved at all costs that this nightmare must end. Even the militarization, we have demystified it. You saw the arrests are done by the military. We are documenting every step. Indeed, it's true. He's too tired right now. He doesn't even trust his own shadow. And that's where we need to come. Yes. And that's where we need to come together. We need to continue to push. And we need to organize by choice.
So, as a follow-up question to that, and really for all of you, you mentioned the funding that the Museveni government has received from the EU, from the United States, from the World Bank. How can donors better assure that their funding provides support to populations in poverty, to refugees, to humanitarian emergencies, without propping up dictatorships and facilitating their human rights abuses?
It's extremely difficult. Sorry, it's extremely difficult. And the USAID does a somewhat good job of actually, they audit their grants every month, which is a real pain in the neck for organizations that receive the funding. So some organizations do it at great cost in terms of time and accounting and so on. But for the most part, other US funding goes via the World Bank and the IMF quite a bit, hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Or it goes via, we have 2 military bases, this is the really scary thing, in Uganda, where we train officers from all over Africa, AFRICOM does, and work closely with the Ugandan military, which commits the atrocities, some of them, many of them, that you saw in that film. And that also runs a network of torture chambers around the country for anyone, a sort of, Holiday Inn for anyone who criticizes the regime too vociferously, and sometimes anyone at all, just to terrify people.
Yeah.
So that's, so I guess what I'd say is keep money for humanitarian projects, but think again about this military funding, a lot of which is classified and we don't even know about, and also put some reins on the World Bank, which also sends money, which at least 300 million from the World Bank for COVID funds, for example, went funded directly into a supplementary military budget 6 months before the atrocities you saw in that film occurred around the 2021 elections. So basically the World Bank funded in part or in whole those atrocities, and they should stop.
I mean, this is easier said than done, but this is not the first country where there's a need to provide humanitarian assistance, and ideally you wouldn't provide it through the government. Look at Afghanistan today. The people are absolutely desperate. Everybody recognizes you've got to fund healthcare, you've got to fund education. Nobody wants to fund the Taliban. They're figuring it out. So if the will is there, you can do that. The problem is that Museveni is not seen like the Taliban. Museveni is seen as a U.S. ally. Going through the World Bank doesn't help because the World Bank, is particularly deferential to governments. And so, I mean, the kind of auditing that Helen describes is not a World Bank specialty. It's enough for them to even have a kind of a serious discussion before they throw money at the government. But I think that the principle which we should insist on is that this is now a government whose military is committing systematic atrocities. It should not be funded, and money for humanitarian aid or development assistance should be provided through either directly to hospitals, to the people who are doing the work, or to NGOs or anybody who is not the government as a conduit. Now, one thing that is coming up next week, which is worth focusing on, is next week is the U.S. Africa Summit, and Biden knew enough not to invite the various military coup leaders.
Yeah.
So Sudan won't be there, Mali won't be there, Museveni will be there. And it's worth asking, so what's the difference between, a coup leader and Museveni? Okay, Museveni didn't have to do a coup, he's been in charge already, but he destroyed democracy as much as a coup leader does.
Yes.
So why should he be there? And the answer is not that he's a democratic leader, the answer is just that he's a U.S. ally.
Yes.
And which is why, I think we have to find ways of raising the cost of that alliance. The U.S. these days tends to look at Africa as, another Cold War playing field. So, are you with China, are you with Russia, or are you with the United States? And Museveni knows how to play that game. So, but that shouldn't be enough. The point of U.S. relations with Africa should not be who's going to compete with Beijing or Moscow. It should be about who's going to do what's good for the African people, which is not supporting dictatorships. So I think that we need to push that, and the absurdity that Museveni is showing up at the summit next week gives us a real opportunity to spotlight something that shouldn't be happening in the first place.
The U.S. State Department, after the 2021 elections, stated very clearly and posted it on their website that the elections were neither free nor fair.
Yes.
Then they are now obliged to qualify that commitment, that conclusion, that indeed the person in the presidency of Uganda is a fraudster. This is somebody who robbed us, the Ugandans, of our voice, of our identity, of our dignity, by stealing in broad daylight these elections. Why go ahead and fund him?
Yes.
Why go ahead and find, are you not an accomplished?
Yes.
Are you not an accomplished? So, for me, the U.S. must conclude conclusively and logically not recognize this fraud in the seat of our president, elected president, that we should not dilly around it. One. Yes. Two, the funding is not only about the auditing. Your funding has actually committed these murders because yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
So why wouldn't you stop for the time being and self-examine, why are we continuing to rob Ugandans of their lives, of their people? Because the abductions are still going on in broad daylight.
Yes.
My two sons were brutalized by military men simply because, one, I refused to be bribed, to be bought off, like the current Minister of Constitutional Affairs was bought off, okay, from opposition. When I refused to be bought off, what happened? I was arrested because they had offered for me 5 billion Uganda shillings. By the way, it is still going on. Right now, they are offering in millions of dollars. Yes, so what is it you are buying from me? When the health institutions, the education system is totally run down, women are going to death chambers not to deliver, not to give life, but to die. Okay? So, this is a conversation. It's not about the money, it's about blatantly, conclusively stating and not recognizing this robber who is using. Because now he doesn't have a social contract with us. There's no social contract with the citizens. So what do? Kill them at length. Kill them. Because you are not accountable. So we are committing the U.S. government and the Western world to live up to their commitment to the responsibility to protect 1994 and beyond. Never again. But now you're even funding the again and again and again. We said, please, can that stop? No.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, let me add some good points, because the way to get the U.S. to stop funding
Submission.
it's not enough just to say this guy stole the election, this guy is a dictator, because sadly half the recipients of USAID fall into that category. And so what you need to show is that, you know, the US money is underwriting violence against the people of Uganda. And there the, you know, the law, the policy is clear that that's not supposed to be happening. Now, clearly that happens in various places as well. But I think the, you know, what you've begun to do, which is really to carefully document the, you know, the disappearances, the torture, the murders, that's the route. Because, you know, if we can show that US funds are actually, you know, underwriting it, that is something that the Congress and the State Department could be forced to pay attention to.
I will say, just FYI, that I sent, I worked with a Ugandan lawyer, and he wrote to Senator Coons, who has connections with Senator from Delaware. He's very close to the administration of foreign policy, particularly on Africa. And we wrote to him about this, what happened with the World Bank funds for COVID, and he never replied. Surprise, surprise. And then shortly after that, once everything looked like everything was sort of smoldering and there was smoke and ruin everywhere, and unfortunately some dead bodies, Museveni swore himself into office, and another tranche of IMF money went direct to his coffers and disappeared again. So it's not as though people haven't tried to raise this. In fact, you know, some of us have been trying to do it for the past 15 years. So, to no avail whatsoever. So it's very difficult.
So just one more question, and then I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. So do we have microphones? Great, perfect. So just raise your hand and we will get you a microphone. So my last question, it talked a bit in the film about social media and how it was shut down in advance of the election, which tells me that it must be a very important tool for organizing an opposition to a dictatorship. To what extent has social media become really important for your party and for the pro-democracy movement and human rights movement in Uganda? And how have you seen it being used or abused in other countries as well around the world for Helen and Karen?
Yes, thank you very much. Social media, from the time our president, His Excellency Robert Chagulanyi Sentamu announced that he was going to run for the presidency, this is a young generation. Their tool for communication, for campaigns, is right here. The militarized spaces and the use of rule by law in terms of the COVID response, militarized COVID response, was only targeting us, the opposition, especially the National Unity Platform. We were not allowed anywhere in the main media, whether it is TV or radio stations, many radio stations would just first take our money and say, no, the military have taken us over, so we're not going to host you. So we resorted, I even had to learn. So social media is so critical and very central and very effective. Very effective. Because of the different audiences we would be able to reach within a very short time. So what happened? Museveni comes and totally shuts off social media. First, he raised the tax. He wanted to make it so unaffordable for any Ugandan. There was a social media tax that we challenged. The case is even still in court. And it actually sparked a number of the killings, including the first killing of Rita. Rita was one of those accused, and she was coming to court that day, that unfortunate day. And then, because she was wearing her beret, she was knocked by a police vehicle. This driver even reversed and killed her. So social media is very, very critical. And Museveni fears it so much. He really fears it so much. And it's so effective, so efficient, such that the taxing is still very high. And even the shutdown on Facebook, which the young population loves so much to communicate through. We have to use VPN in Uganda. Here I was still also struggling to go back to VPN. Lo and behold, there's no such thing. So the freedom of expression, the freedom of association, the freedom of communication has been so clamped down, and especially the use of social media. This was followed by militarization of spaces, all spaces, and it still continues up to today. The abductions, as we're speaking, many of our young people are abducted, are being abducted, taken to safe houses, tortured, and many many of the young women were raped. They've gone through the most horrific, barbaric torture experiences. And we have young men today whose manhood have been shattered, all in the name of suppression. And this must end.
Well, I mean, social media is obviously incredibly important, and it's, first of all, it's a way for everybody to communicate, even when traditional media may be censored or may have difficulty with the message. And you can always just communicate directly on social media. Now, that's double-edged, because it also means that, autocratic governments who may want to put out lies or deception, and the traditional media wouldn't believe them, they wouldn't repeat it, but they just put it on social media too. And then they use their own trolls and bots to spread it. So it is double-edged there. But I see social media, overall as a huge advance for democratization. And it allows us to, to find out about abuses and to spread word of them when otherwise they might have been hidden. And, I suppose most importantly, it allows us to talk to each other.
Yeah.
It's a way of allowing everybody to understand, what their position is on an issue, on a candidate. It notifies us when there's a rally. It's a great way of communicating. So, I mean, I'm a big fan. I'm kind of somewhat addicted to Twitter, and I use it, all the time. And I have many people in Uganda who follow me. I've always been impressed by that. It particularly, at the height of the campaign, I would be getting, hundreds and hundreds of retweets about everything I post in Uganda, because there's just this thirst for. I don't think I was telling the people of Uganda anything new, but there was this sort of desire for the solidarity and the sense that this is something that we're all in together, that people really wanted.
Just, I don't know whether Ken might know whether any other country has actually shut down the entire internet during an election because they were so afraid of social media. So I think there's something a bit special about Uganda in that regard. Yeah. By the way, I just remembered something. The letter that was written to Senator Cruz actually came to the New York City Bar. So it's a anyway, yeah.
Just some small addition that I left out. I apologize for that. Through social media, the You Vote app, we were able to use it effectively as no. The result of which is an evidence of the rigging of the elections in Uganda. Compiled here by Dr. Nick Shonderwood, whose wife is here present with us. Yes. Because we're able to upload it and the team of engineers, including Evelyn, who is here present. We have this incredible evidence, and also through the use of all these apps, we were able to, now we have an app developed by the same team, led by Nico, where we have been recording and reporting all these disappearances and things. Yeah.
Well, let's open it now to the audience. Please raise your hand for questions. I think we have one in the back here, and Anne will bring along.
Thank you. My name is Eglin, and I'm from Minnesota. My question is directed to Ken. Ugandans in the diaspora are taking measures to highlight the plight of human rights violation. And evidently, we've come together and put this event together. Thank you to Brown University for sponsoring this. So what more would you recommend that we need to do as the Ugandans in the diaspora to continue not only highlighting, but to use human rights violations as a weapon to make sure that we push the dictator to make sure he's held accountable? What would you recommend that we should do more? Thank you.
That's not an easy question. It is an uphill battle. You know, I mean, Museveni is seen as a U.S. ally. You know, nobody wants to rock that boat. That's the difficulty that we have right now. I do think that there is an education process that would be useful in that, you know, most people don't understand how bad it is. And I would target, you know, you're in Minnesota, I would target your representative in Congress. You know, try to, you know, go to them with specific things like, you know, why is this, you know, U.S. military aid still going to the UPDF when it, you know, is going to, I mean, pick something very specific like that. So I wouldn't say, you know, how do we, you know, why are we still supporting Museveni? That's sort of too broad, but, you know, focus on particular things, you know, or, you know, why are we still allowing him to siphon off COVID assistance? You know, I mean, I'd have to look at this more closely to find out what the best, you know, particular issue is. But then I think you do want to try to educate. You're all from someplace in the United States. You have representatives, you know, so that's an opportunity. And, you know, you also can write to journalists and say, you know, whoever it is who's covering Uganda, you know, why are you not focusing on this? And that's, you know, journalists are actually you can even just tag them on Twitter. I mean, it's not that hard to do. You know, you don't even have to write a letter, but you can just sort of figure out who it is and you know, just start tagging them. And as atrocities come up, and you know, journalists do look to that as a source of leads, and if there seems to be a drumbeat, they're more likely to then try to, you know, investigate it more and to write about it. But I think that, you know, those are things that you all can do, you know, and I don't pretend that it's easy, but it's definitely useful to do because, you know, as people hear more and more, you know, and as the diaspora seems to be, you know, chiming up and there seems to be something going on, people will then be more inclined to look.
Thank you. I think we have another question. Yeah.
Hi, good evening. My name is Queen. I'll stand up. And I have two questions. So one is for Ken, and it's sort of like a follow-up from what you just answered. I'm really interested in knowing what actually the human rights uses these documentaries for. So the documentation is happening, and you have all these reports, and for some good years, like I keep seeing all these reports happening about Uganda. Why can't those reports be used to discredit the president's credibility? Because if you're telling me that he's showing up in this convention that is coming up, and you have these reports seated with you, I mean, if the people on ground are actually recording and presenting them, then what exactly are they being used for? Why can't they be used as a bargaining chip to actually even be, you know, apart from cutting off those relationships, to also limit the donations? And then my second question is to Dr. Lynn. You've been speaking about us people in diaspora doing organizing, which is happening. And the last elections that came up, I actually called the embassy in Washington, and I asked if Ugandans could vote from our embassies, and we cannot vote from our embassies. And one of the things that pains me is that you'll be on social media, and the people back home are like, oh, why don't you come back and, you know, be in the struggle with us or vote? And some of the diaspora people actually can't travel. They can go back home right now. And I'm wondering, as we are thinking about organizing, are we actually thinking about tapping into this opportunity of, we have embassies spread out, whether it's in the US or UAE or wherever. how can we get our embassies to actually permit people that still have the Ugandan citizenship to be able to show up? How can we be able to use our new representatives to be able to monitor this voting happening? Because I would like to contribute like that. Thank you.
Let me, if I could, come back to this summit next week, because I think this is an opportunity. The summit is December 13th to the 15th. And, a very simple message at this stage is, why is Museveni there? Now, he's not going to get uninvited, so, that's not really the aim at this point. But many journalists are going to be writing hypocrisy stories. They're going to be saying, Biden said his foreign policy was going to be guided by democracy. Why is he inviting enemies of democracy? And so you can predict these stories will start coming. We want Museveni to be named in all those stories. Okay, we want him to become just, the trademark for the autocrats of Africa. If you think about, who are the people who shouldn't be invited, who are the, the autocrats who are U.S. allies who shouldn't be, people, you want to start with Museveni, and that, and we have an opportunity to do that. That just this next week. So, it's really worth leaving this and figuring out, do you know anybody on an editorial board who you might be able to persuade to write an editorial about the summit next week? Do you know, any journalists who might write about these issues? Can you just tweet about it or put it on Facebook or whatever social media you use? Why is Museveni coming to the summit? And it is an opportunity to just raise the profile of these issues.
There is a piece actually by Remy Bahati on exactly that point, by the way, a very distinguished Ugandan journalist. And I will make sure the organizers have it and they can distribute it widely, actually. It's very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Queen. Thank you for that question about your dilemma and the requirement you would read and the desire that you would like to vote. Where we have reached in terms of Museveni's desperate need to cling to power, would your appearing at the embassy be safe? You saw here where up in the, I also didn't vote because when I reached I was immediately picked and whisked away, arrested on the election day. So therefore, what lessons do we learn here that we would like to make sure that the civic participation and obligation is very safe? You and I know the answer. We need to get rid of that roadblock, that roadblock that is not allowing us, that is sitting on our fundamental rights to vote. We have to create that space. No, and that's why we are holding this conversation. How best can we do that to enable other generations not to be excluded, not to be robbed of their identity and dignity to vote, but rather to create a holistic space. Unless we do that, even if you showed up at the embassy, they will tell you, no, we finished voting long time.
Other questions? Seems to be mostly over here. Okay, let's go back here.
Hi, my name is Grace. Maybe I should, no. So a lot has been said about Museveni, and rightly so, because he's created all the mayhem over the last 3 decades plus. But I think the international community should also be worried about another dictator in the making, his son, who is a general in the UPDF, and he's more ruthless, I think, than the father.
Yeah.
He is, I think, behind all the current wave of abductions, and currently I think they are trying to cook up something like the Uganda Democratic Movement or something like. So they are trying to remodel the movement, and their party to appear like it's taking over. It's more moderate, it's more tolerant than his father's. So I'm wondering if the international community is aware, because Museveni is tired, he's old, he's like Roth said is maybe it'll be dying in the next probably so many years. But there's another one now coming up, and a younger generation of terrorists, another young generation of oppressors. So what are we going to do? It's like there's no end in sight for Uganda. We're coming from one generation of killers to another. So what are we going to do? How is the international community going to help us? Is the international community even aware that there is another dictator in the making? This is just food for thought for whoever is here. It's like the end is not even over. There's no end in sight for Ugandans. What are we going to do? Thank you. It's just a comment, a simple observation.
I think people know about the sun, but you know, the sun is not the unanimous choice, even of the military. You know, so, I mean, that's going to provide some opportunities. In other words, the regime, you know, when Museveni dies and nobody lives forever, there is, you know, there's going to be an internal battle, and the lesson, you know, I think we want to send is that the next leader should not be a product of that internal battle. The next leader should be a choice of the Ugandan people. You know, but that kind of division actually makes the democratic choice more possible. Because right now, you know, everybody's kind of clinging on to Museveni because they're worried about Bobi Wine. They don't want a popular movement. You know, they don't want democratic government because they're going to lose all their privileges. But that, you know, once the regime starts dividing, which it will with Museveni's death, that does provide a real opening for democratic path.
I think we're next up here in the front.
My name is Alicia and I'm from North Carolina. The question I was asking is about the funding that the U.S. government is giving Uganda, that is main contribution to the mass genocide. The U.S. government actually trace that money, know how it's being used, and if it knows, because the U.S. government knows, why isn't it confronted Museveni yet? Why is there no action being taken on Museveni right now?
Great question. You could go to the White House and ask that question.
When we talk about the U.S. government, I think we also have to be, you know, we shouldn't just lump it all together. In other words, you know, what's her name, Natalie Brown, the U.S. ambassador. My sense of her, she's a decent person. You know, that I think she'd like to see a transition. She represents the State Department. The State Department doesn't really make U.S. policy towards Uganda or any place else. You know, the Pentagon is much more important. And that's where, you know, this view that Uganda UPDF is a bastion of security and stability and anti-terrorism, you know, you name it. But that's, you know, what the Pentagon looks to. And it doesn't want to rock the boat. It's comfortable with the UPDF. And that's the problem we have.
Yeah. There's a, you'll probably, if you're a student, are you a student here at Brown? No. You're not. She's 12. She's 12. Are you 12? Wow. Anyway, when you get a little older, you might. There's a philosopher called Michel Foucault who writes about power and how power in the old days used to be concentrated in a king, much like it is in the 70s. He controls absolutely everything, and it used to be that all countries in the world were like that. There was a king on the top who ordered everyone around, and there would be sort of all sorts of things going on in the grassroots, but generally what he said went. And then when that systems of government shifted, power began to be sort of diffused around institutions and through other kinds of relationships. So you can have a group of incredibly wonderful people, and we all like to friend, Natalie Brown, the former ambassador to Uganda, or maybe current or whatever. But and many others, and even the people in the Pentagon. I've even had sat across from one at dinner once, and she was the nicest person I ever could have met. And yet, all of them are part of this system, which, despite the virtues of each individual person, is extremely unvirtuous and is extremely evil. And it's because there is a prevailing view that what matters most is security, and Museveni is willing to deploy his army anywhere that the United States asks for him to deploy it. So it is currently doing some mischief in Congo. We have no idea what it's really doing. It's supposed to be stopping atrocities. In fact, those atrocities have worsened since the soldiers went into Congo. He used to go and send his soldiers to menace the government of Sudan through support for the southern Sudanese rebels, because we thought there were terrorists there. Then he's also has sent them to Somalia to do our dirty work in Somalia. There are Ugandan guards serving in Iraq, so we don't have to send Americans over there as much as we used to. You notice that? Yeah, there's a good article about that in the Intercept. Google Intercept Uganda guards, and yeah, they also don't listen to compensation when they're wounded, by the way. So it's a really, and God, you know, who knows where else they are, but it's, you know, it's a very, very, very dirty business, and people just, you know, each individual makes his decision and then goes home and goes to sleep, and that's it. So, yeah.
Okay, so we've got lots of questions, but I'm also mindful of food and dinner. So let's take just a couple more questions here. Maybe one, two. Oh,
this side.
I didn't see you guys before. Yeah, why don't we take a group of 3 questions? You guys can all ask them at once, and then we'll have answers from the panel. So 1, 2, 3, and 1 here, 2 over there. Oh my gosh. But I will say, I'm sure our panelists will be sticking around during dinner. We'll go to 3 in the back there at the end. I'm sure our panelists will be sticking around during dinner, so you guys can continue to ask questions. Okay. We'll take number 4 there as well. All right,
Didn't
so
see me.
you can keep them brief, please.
Thank you so much, the panelists and the organizers. We can hold Museveni accountable for his atrocities and whatever he has done. But we also want to hold US accountable for its participation. Yeah. We all request from the panel, in case there is one who has any idea, that you can please give us to how we can hold US accountable for its engagement with Museveni, because Ugandans are seeing US as an enabler, at the same time betraying Ugandans.
Thank you very much. My name is Gina. My question is, if we as Ugandans rise up and do exactly what Museveni did when he claimed that he lost the election, will it be a crime in the face of the international community? Because since he hasn't been held accountable, I mean, I just want to know, if we do the same thing, shall we be held accountable or not? Because we are frustrated, we are tired, we are sick and tired of his dictatorship. So I know there might come a point when people cannot be controlled. So if we do the same thing, because he said he lost the election, which he never did, but we lost it. So if we do the same thing, is it gonna be a crime? We are tired.
I am Reverend Nakaba Alikasa from Providence. Thank you for convening us. And so far, what you have said, the panel and the rest, you have missed the mark. First of all, United States is helping the Tutsis to destabilize Uganda, destabilize South Sudan, and other African nations. The only thing we can do, we have to do, Ugandans, is to get rid of Tutsis from Uganda.
Exactly, even now.
Because
yes.
What Museveni is playing a game to you is saying, running after the ADF when Museveni is an ADF agent. Two, United States is using Rwanda to send troops to Congo that they are tracing the Hutus. Therefore, the conclusion is, or let me say the conclusion, is United States is doing this for achieving wealth, minerals. That's the reason. And whatever we talk about, human rights, whatever, unless we get rid of the Tutsis from Uganda, we will never have peace. You can see the archbishops have been poisoned.
Yeah. Let me address that. I think it's very important too.
Archbishop, another one, has been poisoned because of talking about human rights and violation.
Thank you, sir.
Therefore, Tutsis are the problem for Uganda and the Congo.
Okay, we heard you. Okay. Let me just say, the last time we heard, denunciations of Tutsis, you know what happened. There was a genocide. We should never be turning this into an ethnic issue. Okay, we just should not go down that path.
But it's a fact.
You can differ with governments, you can differ with policies. Do not turn it into an ethnic issue. We should not be denouncing any ethnic group. Okay. Also, the idea that the U.S. wants the M23 in Congo. I mean, it was John Kerry's intervention that got Kagame to stop supporting the M23 8 years ago or so. And it crumbled at that stage.
It comes from Uganda. 23 comes from Uganda. It's a Museveni.
Just like Joseph Kony was. Joseph Kony was Museveni.
Okay. But my point is, we should talk about governance. We should not be talking about ethnic.
It's also true that even one other question related to the sort of Tutsi issue is that, even in Rwanda, the vast majority,
Hutus.
Tutsis were, let's say in Uganda, the vast majority of people from Museveni's own ethnic group do not support him. Great many do not support him, so you can't just simply label. And a lot of Tutsis inside Rwanda did not support the RPF, but then became victims of a genocide that resulted in.
I know Ugandans, and I know who are foreigners. Those who are in the government are Tutsis, imported.
I think we're going to wrap up at this point. I want to thank everyone for joining us today.
There was a question. There was a question here.
Let me address the criminality point.
Yes.
Okay, because it also, in the film, there was a reference to the International Criminal Court. And while, in principle, the ICC has jurisdiction over, serious crimes in Uganda, in reality, it's not going to go there anymore. They're not eager to take on more African cases because they've been so criticized for being so focused on Africa. So Karim Khan, the prosecutor, is looking elsewhere. And he also is overwhelmed. In his view, he has too little staff for the number of cases he has. So he's not looking for new cases. So the question is, how does one get justice for what is going on in Uganda? in principle, there's this concept of universal jurisdiction, meaning, in Europe or various other countries, you could theoretically prosecute somebody. But I wouldn't spend a lot of time on that. I mean, I think justice for the people of Uganda is going to come when there's a new government and when there's a justice system that is free to be able to pursue crimes that have been committed. And rather than getting all focused on criminal prosecution now, I think the focus should be on, ending the repression, having a democratic election, and allowing a democratically elected government to then pursue the crimes that have been committed.
All right. I want to finish by thanking our panelists for joining us today, and I want to thank all of you for coming, so many from so far away, to be part of this discussion. We are now going to continue with dinner for everybody here in the lobby, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to continue asking questions and talking over dinner beyond. So.
Thank you guys so much. Just to let you know that there's meat that will be passed around. It does have peanuts on it, so if you have a peanut allergy, please avoid it. But everything else is delicious. Enjoy.
Thank you all.
Ensonga zibadde nnyuvu, zibadde nnungi, zibadde mawa. Zoogeddwako njera ziteeseddwako n'ekirina okukolebwa. Abazungu nabo baamanya dda era bakimanyi nti Museveni ebintu bye si byanjulukufu, nti alina ebintu ebimu by'akola ku lwolwe olw'okwebeezaawo, era nti abazungu nabo yabatimba ddabula. Abagamba kino n'ate ng'ekituufu kiri kino. Kinabo bakimanyi lwakuba nti America munywanyi wa Museveni, n'olwekyo bulaba ebintu ebimu biyinza obutakola nga bwe tubyetaaga, kuba America ekyetaaga okukozesa Museveni yo byeyagala. Era lunaku bwe lulikya nga America ekooye okukozesa mwami Museveni, mujja kulabira awo nga abadde munywanyi waayo, ng'abadde mukwano gwayo, nga babadde bakitiza, babadde bakola ebyabwe ng'ate bamuvuddemu. Kati gwe munnayuganda olina kuba ng'okola bukozi ekyo ky'oteekeddwa okukola. Luliba olwo bujja kukya byonna bikyuke, byonna bitereere nga bw'obyagadde. Naye nga kyo tekiyinza kubaawo nga gwe osirise busirisi, otudde butuuzi nga si by'oliko. Walina okubaawo ky'okola eky'enjawulo, ekyo ekinaakutuusa ku buwanguzi, ekyo ekinaakutuusa ku Uganda empya. Era nga Uganda empya si yakulinda bulinzi wabula yakukolerera. Abantu bo banyiivu, si basanyufu, tebalina ssanyu mu bintu byonna ebikolebwa mu gavumenti ya mwami Museveni. Kuba bagamba kutulugunya bantu kususse, ekitta abantu kisusse, ekiwamba abantu kisusse, okutyoboola eddembe lya Munnayuganda kisusse, nga kyandisaanidde okukoma. Naye ate nti mwami Museveni ekyo tekimukolera, ye tekimulya. Era abazungu abatimba bbula buli olukya, abazungu abateeka kadaala buli olukya, ne balemerera okuzuula n'okumanya ekituufu ki ekiri mu maaso, ekigenda mu maaso. Kati n'asigala nga ye yeetwala nga omwana w'abobwe, n'asigala nga yeetwala nga ow'enjawulo, era nti ye waatali America tesobola kutuukiriza mirimu gyayo mu Africa. Ti waliwo kye boogeddeko nti mwami Museveni alabika ya staging entalo ezisinga mu mawanga ageetoolodde Uganda mu Africa, asobole okuba nti asobola okufuna obuyambi okuva mu bazungu, nti abantu bonna abava mu ezo entalo bajja Uganda ng'aba refugee, ng'abanoonyi b'obubudamu. Naye ate nga mwami Museveni abakuli yeetinzeewo ku lw'ebigendererwa by'okufuna ensimbi z'abazungu, ng'ate n'abantu abajja nga ba refugee era tebalina kye bafunamu, basigala babonaabona n'okusinga nga bwe bwali nga bali mu nsi zaabwe, kuba ensimbi eziweerezebwa ate mwami Museveni tyazikolamu bibye. Kati nno bano batulaze nti ebyo byonna bigenda kuggwa, nti kati kye balina okukola kwe kugenda mu bavunaanyizibwa nga babagamba ABCD nga babagamba Mwami Museveni ali kino na kino, Mwami Museveni akoze kino na kino, basobole okumanya ekituufu ekikwatagana ku Museveni, basobole okumanya ekituufu Museveni yaani, era basobole okuba nti no bakomya okumuwa oba okumufacilitatinga, okumuyamba, okumuwa ebikozesebwa nga mu ntalo, okutendeka basirikale, kumuwa byakulwanyisa, nti bino ate abikozesa bubi, n'ensimbi zamuwa zikozesa bubi, nadda ate ku bannayuganda byalina okukuuma, n'atulugunya, n'akuba, n'atta, n'awamba, n'asiba watali musango. Bannayuganda beera nga bali mu makomera naye ate nga tebalina musango, nga tewali ayinza nakugamba nti kino kiri bwekiti ne kino kiri bwekiti, wabula bannayuganda ne babonaabona, ne basibwa ewatali musango, ne babeera mu makomera watali kwozesebwa, naye nga tewali musango na gumu bwe guti gwe bazza, wabula okuba Mwami Museveni alina ebigendererwa ebibye byabala, byagoba, byatuukiriza. Kati nga gwe Munnayuganda oyinza okubeera eyo n'oweesimisa Mwami Museveni, n'oweesimisa byakola, n'oweesimisa kikyali, naye ng'ate ye alina ebigendererwa ebibye bya njawulo nnyo ku bibyo ggwe by'osuubira, ku bibyo ggwe by'olaba, ku bibyo by'olinamu essuubi, nga ye ate ebibye ebirala nnyo. N'olwekyo bannayuganda nti banyiivu, si basanyufu, emitima gibaluma, gibeekyekera olwa ensi yaabwe okuba nti eri mu kusaanawo, ensi Uganda okuba nti tekyalina lugendo, terina gyedda, wabula buli omu abonaabona bubonyibonyi, ate mu nsi mwe yandibadde yeeyagalira, ensi mwe yandibadde afunira essanyu, Munnayuganda ate abonaaboneramu bubonaabonezi, teyeeyagala, talina mirembe, awambibwa, asibwa, agunyizibwa, attibwa, talina mirembe Munnayuganda mu nsi ye, ate nga yandibadde alina emirembe mu ggwanga Uganda. Ebyo nno bye bannayuganda ebibaluma abali mu diaspora, n'ate si bokka, n'abali eyo nabo balumwa, ensonga era ze zimu, naye nga ekyokulaba nti bino bitereera kwe kwekemba okussa ekimu, okulaba nti bwe tukola kino na kino, Mwami Museveni tumuggyako ate mu mirembe, bw'anaavaako mu mirembe, Uganda ejja kufuna essanyu, kufuna ekyayagala. Ensonga zitambudde bulungi, olukuŋŋaana lubadde lwakabi, lwadde okuwangana birowoozo ki ekiyinza okukolebwa okulaba nga abazungu bakomya okufandinga oba okuwa Mwami Museveni ensimbi, nga bannayuganda bagamba Bobi Wine Kyagulanyi president nti abazungu bano balemezzaako Museveni kuba bamuwa ensimbi ze bamuwadde, ate n'azikozesa okutulugunya, okuwamba, ne zimwongeresa okukola ebikolobero bingi, n'olwekyo ensimbi zino zandibadde zikoma. Gwe mulamu oguliwo okulaba nti Museveni abazungu baddamu muwa ssente, oba oli awo aneekubako mu kifuba. Mbaagala nnyo, mwebale kutuwuliriza, mwebale kutulaba, mwebale kutwagala. Omukama abankuumire.